Our third speaker is Dr. Frances Sommer Anderson, who I believe hails from right here in New York, right?
Well, I live here now.
You live here now, yeah. Both practicing and teaching here in Manhattan. So we welcome you. Her talk originally was going to be titled Pain Treatment in the Trenches, a Case Study Approach. And it's been modified a bit here, but I'll be looking forward to hearing about your cases.
Thank you for inviting me to participate. And I also want to thank my two patients, Anne and Martin, who allowed me to interview them and to use their words in my presentation today. I'd like to start with a moment of silence and invite you to notice what's happening in your body, feeling the support of the seat and the floor under your feet, and noticing what you're feeling and what you're thinking. And how does that compare with how you felt when you came in this morning? Notice any changes throughout the day from this morning to this moment. And now I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're my patient Anne, age 50. She says, when I wake up in the morning, I call it red alert. As soon as I'm conscious, okay, what do I have to do to be wary of? Something bad's going to happen today, so I have to do everything to avoid it. I'm still afraid of the unintended consequences of not being perfect. I've learned in therapy for my pain that I need to take 5 minutes just to lie in bed and look around and say, I'm not in that environment anymore. Now imagine that you're Martin, also age 50. He's describing his discovery of a beach ball of fear that he had unconsciously kept underwater until he came for treatment of pain. The beach ball is all the scary things when you're not afraid of them anymore, or you're not really worried or confused as to why things are the way they are. They don't have the power they had before. Understanding that it happened and it was real and that it had an impact has reduced my fear. I don't feel like I'm running around trying to keep everything in place the way I've felt most of my life. Anne and Martin grew up in intact families. Each is the youngest of 5 children. They have graduate degrees, work under extreme pressure at high-level administrative positions, and are well compensated. Anne, unattached by choice, has been in treatment with me for 6.5 years. Martin, in therapy just over 2 years with me, is happily married with 4 children. And as I mentioned, while preparing for the conference, I interviewed Anne and Martin about early life stress, somatic pain, and recovery. I'll be interweaving their words in mind. As you listen, notice the sensations in your body. Notice what you're feeling. Notice what you're thinking. You'll hear how Anne and Martin grew up with fear that was not regulated by secure attachments. Attend to the relationship they discovered between unconscious emotions and the development of somatic pain. Consider how relief from pain was possible after a medical diagnosis that linked their pain with feelings that had previously been proscribed. The diagnosis by a medical authority offered a secure attachment that reduced fear of what was happening in their bodies. In treatment with an embodied, attuned, empathic psychoanalyst, Anne and Martin learned to identify, to tolerate, and to regulate previously unconscious feelings, particularly fear, rage, and sorrow. With determination and courage, they began to integrate their feelings with the story of what happened to them, thereby equipping them to make changes in their lives. Their capacity to use feelings as a guide began to heal the somatic pain. Anne described growing up as difficult. Her father drank a lot. He was volatile. You never knew the person you were going to get. He was nasty. He directed his harsh physical discipline at her oldest sister. Although her mother tried to keep the peace, Anne always felt a level of tension and fear, and is still very wary of confrontation. She used to panic if her mother got sick. If something happened to her, it was really going to be bad. How did Anne survive? I avoided my father because he was trouble. At a very early age, I saved myself. I was born 30. She was the perfect kid, the perfect student at all costs. Watching what happened to her older siblings, she learned to recognize people's personalities pretty quickly and adjust her approach accordingly. She learned how to negotiate. These skills underlie her success in a corporation dominated by men. She also had a close bond with her next older sister. Ending. It's healthy to feel my emotions. You know that it's hard for me to cry. My mother used to say, "Don't cry, it's okay, don't cry." I'm crying today because I'm sad. My tears are saying, I had no choice in the past. Now I have a choice. She's discovered that life is for her, not just for everyone else. Healing her shame about her family home, she bought a larger apartment and hired a decorator. She's building a dream house in the country. She's expanding her social network. She's no longer afraid of her body. She goes to the gym twice a week. I've learned that I can use my body to do something everybody else tends to do and do it in front of probably 30 people. She's made friends with her body's sensations. She says, when we get close to very emotional topics, I still get pain. As you've taught me, I'm grateful for it because it's telling me that I'm having very strong feelings and that it's okay to have them. In my family, that was taboo. I'm going to invite you to take another moment of silence just to notice your reactions to hearing Anne's story. And notice the sensations in your body, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. Feeling the support of the seat and the floor under your feet. Martin said that chaos was a good word to describe growing up in his family. His father, a pretty strong disciplinarian, would go from being loving dad to out of his mind really angry. Daily, his father's physical violence toward his children contrasted starkly with his reputation as a much-loved and highly esteemed schoolteacher. One of Martin's older brothers, who was bullied by his peers, also beat the hell out of Martin often. Basically, I was the outlet for my brother's anger. So I got it from Dad, and I got it from him. Describing his father's unpredictable violence, he said, "I remember belts being a go-to weapon, an implementation device. He would never hit with a closed fist, but I remember laying on the bed with my arms and hands up, trying to stop him as the strap was going around my arms and across my legs." How did Martin survive? He couldn't run to his mom. She was not warm and huggy. She was a suck-it-up mother. Much like Anne, Martin learned from watching what happened to his older siblings. He stayed off the radar, trying not to be the target of any of the outbursts. And he did his best in everything. So my life is filled with success and achievement, I think in large measure because of learning to do that. When he was being beaten, he said, "I played possum. I would check out." I used this more often with my brother because it would be so frequent, and that would be one way of getting him to stop. But it was going to happen. I might as well just not be there. So I'd go internal and try not to feel it. When his father assaulted him, he stated, "I was not going to cry because that's what he wanted." So it was part just checking out and part just not letting it show. I remember looking up at him, pursed lips, pure hatred and anger in my eyes, thinking, he can do what he wants, but I'm not going to cry. The irony is, my not crying became a family joke. I didn't know this until I was an adult, when my mother told me that she, my sister, and my brothers would be in the next room laughing. Gosh, if Martin would just cry, he'd stop, they'd say to themselves. When she told me this, she asked, "Why didn't you just cry? If you had have cried, he'd have stopped." I'm like, well, I didn't know that's the way it worked. Maybe I would have cried sooner. Martin was also shamed about being the youngest, who had to go to bed first. Often, as he left the family circle to go to his room, his parents and siblings would mock him. In an agitated state, Martin lay on his bed crying and banging his feet on the wall to protest. If he awoke with a nightmare, he would go into his parents' bedroom and snuggle with his father, who would comfort him. Martin's relationship with his father was even more complicated. My father would come home from school and almost daily have one of us kids rub his feet. As the youngest, I would often get tasked with it. Sometimes he'd pay a quarter, sometimes he'd say thanks. Although it wasn't fun, Martin, who also had sensitive feet, established a strong, positive bond by being the best at soothing his father's feet. Martin's first physical symptom was indigestion. Eating Tums at 12 and 13 is probably not typical, but I remember it vividly. My father ate Tums all the time. In college, Martin had shin splints and other medically unexplained somatic pains. In the military, he had pretty bad knee pain and some wrist and hand pain, and at that time he attributed it to computer work. The really bad symptoms, muscle and joint pains, came when he was in active duty. He was medically discharged because of them. During his early business career, he went at it with his typical 125% effort. When he experienced severe leg and ankle pain, he equipped his car with a hand drive system. He was unable to run, and walking was difficult. At one point, I had been unable to move my fingers, so I was using a block attached to a pencil in order to write. It was like I was 80 years old going on 30. After consulting several physicians and doing breathing work and biofeedback, he was given a stress-related pain diagnosis by Andrea Leonard Siegel, a rheumatologist in Washington, D.C., who had studied with Dr. Sarno. 4 months later, he ran a marathon. A long-held dream came true. It was a miracle, he said. What made that miracle possible? Dr. Leonard Siegel's diagnosis was the first step in his recovery. He said, "I'll never forget the phrase she used. Martin, you could run a marathon with a refrigerator on your back physically. Your pain is not induced by physical problems, it's stress-related." He and his wife read Dr. Sarno's book, The Mind-Body Prescription. I could see myself on all the pages of Sarno's book. The drivenness, the perfectionism, the guilty conscience, the hypersensitivity to others' opinions. He started journaling. Dr. Leonard Siegel kept saying things like, "Don't should on yourself," and "You're only allowed to be guilty if you purposely meant to hurt someone or purposely meant to do harm." Martin resonated with Dr. Sarno's hypothesis about a reservoir of rage that builds while trying to be perfect and trying to keep the peace in order to survive difficult childhood experiences. He said, "I had driven myself, had been so conscientious about everything around me. Obviously, there's somebody inside who's quite angry about what happened. The kind of solace or comfort that I never got from my mom. That's what a kid wanted. There was no protector. It's not like she was stepping in and stopping it. I had never consciously thought of being angry at her." Despite impressive progress, Martin's physical symptoms never went away. His second bout of pain began in 2011 when he had a stomach flu and woke with some strange numbness in his toes. As I was walking, it felt like I had a quarter in my shoe, but nothing was there. There were spots on my feet that started to get numb. Despite his fear, he continued with golf, tennis, and jogging. In 2014, he had seasonal flu, and the disturbing sensations in his feet intensified. After extensive medical evaluations, he was diagnosed with idiopathic peripheral neuropathy. This diagnosis terrified him because the source of the pain had not been identified. Then he went to see Dr. Ira Rashbaum, a longtime associate of Dr. Sarno. Dr. Rashbaum is professor of rehabilitation medicine at Rusk Institute. Dr. Rashbaum gave him a TMS diagnosis and referred him to me in late June 2014. Martin is recovering again. His fear of the sensations in his feet required a potent combination of Cymbalta, Neurontin, Strattera, and Ativan for 1.5 years. Just this spring, he discontinued the first 3 medications, tapering off under medical supervision. Now he's able to tolerate anxiety about the sensations in his feet using only breathing practices, meditation, prayer, and Ativan. He had stopped working out for almost a year. Now he works out at least twice a week. After not golfing for a year, he played at least 50 rounds this season and walked probably 90% of them. I feel the sensations while I walk. I know that my feet aren't right, but I'm not afraid I'm going to damage myself. Understanding how connected the painful sensations are to my emotional state is some comfort. There's hope that if I continue to work on this, it will ultimately go away. We're healing his painful feet by treating the childhood trauma he survived. He's more patient now with the everyday inconveniences of life, and he no longer runs, and I underscore runs, from emotional challenges. Growing up, he thought that having uncertainty and a volatile parent made you stronger and more resilient. His new learning is that kids need consistency and clarity, and that they don't respond well to chaos. This new learning has led him to gradually transform himself as a father. In the session after I interviewed Martin, he referred to a memory of one of the times his father punished him, a scene we had talked about 1,000 times. He's chasing me down the hall. I can hear the belt coming out. I can hear him saying, "Get your hands down, move your hands." Martin starts to feel the terror, here and now, that he felt there and then. For the first time in our work, he's crying the tears of the young boy he was, about 4 years old. A day later, he wrote an email to me describing how he'd been integrated what happened in that session. It seems like I'm living above this hardened shell, oblivious to how anything that is beneath it affects my life, my personality, or anything that I do. And with our work, every once in a while we prick the shell so that I can look inside, allow a pinhole of light into what is beneath. Sadly, at least these past 2 sessions, what I see is very ugly and bothersome. It's like this horrible experience that I find hard to believe actually happened. I know it happened. I lived through it. But like I said in the interview, there's a huge difference between knowing something and feeling it. These past 2 sessions, I have felt it in a way that exists only beneath the hard shell of my daily existence. I'm not sure how these pinholes lead to healing. Maybe you can help me understand that more. For now, they just hurt, and they make me feel sad, not only for what I went through, but how I feel so horribly sad about the father I have been, doing the things to my kids that were done to me, but in non-physical ways. I just didn't know. I didn't know any better. And I just wish I could roll back time and be a different father. That part just hurts. Anne and Martin are resilient and determined to find relief from medically unexplained somatic pain that has moved in and out of their lives. In treatment with me, a relational psychoanalyst informed by invaluable research like that presented today, they developed a secure attachment. Within the safety of our relationship, they were able to identify, tolerate, and begin to regulate feelings that had been disconnected from the narrative of growing up in their families. This new learning about feelings could then be integrated into their life stories, enabling them to have a new experience of themselves regarding those narratives, enabling them to make choices to change their lives. Growing up afraid no longer defined nor constrained them as it had for decades. They transformed somatic pain into emotional awareness, which became a source of empowerment. I'll close with the wisdom of another patient who's recovering from 20 years of pain. She said, "Tell them this. Declare within your sinews, I am on to you, pain. I am on to you. I will be okay."